Picture a room in the court of Jerusalem. What's about to be written there, the opening of Proverbs 1, will quietly reshape everything we think we know about wisdom. 10th century BC, give or take. But what matters is the moment. An anonymous scribe, someone whose name we'll never know, picks up a clay tablet or a papyrus scroll. He spent his entire life collecting short sayings, observations about how life works, moral compass needles, you might call them. But he doesn't start with a commandment. He doesn't open with "obey your father." He doesn't promise that wisdom will make you rich. He takes the ancient world's search for wisdom and places God, not the king, not the thinker, not the self, at its center. And that reframing is the reason Proverbs 1 might be the most important chapter in the entire Bible for understanding how Hebrew thought actually works. The opening verses of Proverbs, chapter 1, verses 1 through 7, are what Hebrew scholars call a programmatic prologue. That's a technical way of saying this isn't just an introduction, it's a manifesto. It's a declaration of intent that redefines the book you're about to read. The text begins like this: the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and discipline, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair. And then it says something aimed directly at the young and the inexperienced, giving prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. But it doesn't stop there. It says even the wise should listen and add to their learning, and the discerning should get guidance. And then comes verse 7, the hinge of the entire book. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Now stop there. Go back to verse 1. It says the Proverbs of Solomon. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say the commandments of Solomon. It doesn't say the laws of Solomon. It says Proverbs. The Hebrew word is mishlei. It comes from the root mashal, which means to compare, to place alongside. A proverb isn't an order handed down from the top. It's a comparison, an observation, a mirror that lets you see yourself. That's it. Not a command, a mirror. And that's revolutionary. In the ancient Near East, when a king compiled a text, the point was usually to establish authority. Hammurabi carved his laws into stone, so everyone would know who held the power. But Solomon, or whoever wrote in his name, did something different. He compiled observations about how the world works, not orders, observations, and that changes everything about how you read what comes next. Verse 7. This is the hinge of the entire book. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Here's where most modern readers get lost. The Hebrew word for fear here is yirah, and yirah can include fear, but it means far more than being frightened. Here, it carries the sense of reverence, awe, and a posture of the soul before something sacred. But there's a detail here that changes everything. The text says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, not wisdom. The Hebrew word is da'at, not chokmah, and that distinction matters. Da'at is the raw material, perception, awareness, the ability to recognize what's real. Chokmah, wisdom, is what you build with that material. Proverbs 9:10 will later say, the fear of the Lord is also the beginning of chokmah. But here, at the very start, the compiler begins with something more basic. You can't even perceive correctly without reverence. The data itself is distorted without it. The text says yirah is the beginning, the reshit of that knowledge. And reshit can mean beginning, but here it carries something heavier. It points to the foundation, the ground on which everything else is built. Think of a building. Wisdom is the whole structure, walls, rooms, and roof. But yirah, that reverential awe of God, isn't just the first brick you lay. It's the ground itself. It's what makes the building possible. Without it, everything else eventually collapses. That's not a metaphor the text uses lightly. It's the entire architecture. And here's where the text draws a line with surgical precision between two things that are easy to confuse. There's technical wisdom, in Hebrew, chokmah. That's the ability to see patterns, to understand how things work, to make intelligent decisions. It's practical, it's useful, you can teach it in a classroom. But the real wisdom, the kind that actually matters, begins when you understand that all of that technical intelligence rests on a foundation that isn't technical at all. It rests on a relationship with God. Verse 7 says it bluntly. The fool, in Hebrew, they will, a person who is morally stubborn, who refuses correction, despises that foundation, rejects that reverence. And because of that, it doesn't matter how much technical intelligence they have, they aren't truly wise. Here's the thing. Scholars who study the traditional Masoretic form of the Hebrew text point out that verses 1 through 7 function as something completely different from the rest of the book. Verses 1 through 6 are the compiler describing the purpose. Who is this book for? What will you gain from reading it? But verse 7 does something else entirely. It shifts the tone. Suddenly, you're not in the world of, here are some useful tools. You're in the world of faith, of reverence, of the one fundamental decision that defines everything else. It's as if the compiler is saying, look, I'm going to give you a lot of practical advice in the pages that follow. But before you start reading any of it, you need to understand one thing. That advice only works if you understand that wisdom doesn't start with you. It starts with God. And that's a total reframing. In ancient Near Eastern literature, wisdom texts usually began with an attribution to the king. These are the sayings of King Amenemope. The emphasis was always on human authority. But Proverbs gives that wider wisdom tradition a distinctly Israelite foundation. It says, the authority doesn't come from the king. It comes from God. And access to true wisdom requires a posture of reverence before that. Verses 2 through 6. The compiler is building an argument, and each verse adds something. Verse 2. To know wisdom and discipline. The Hebrew word for discipline is musar, and musar isn't merely punishment. It's formation, instruction, correction, the willingness to be shaped, to learn from what went wrong. Verse 3 expands the circle, not just wisdom, but justice, righteousness, equity. The compiler is saying that if you read this book, you won't just learn to make smart decisions, you'll learn to make moral ones. Verse 4, to give prudence to the simple. The Hebrew word for simple is petayim. It doesn't mean stupid, it means open, inexperienced, vulnerable. The compiler is saying this book is especially for people who don't yet have defenses against the world. It will teach you to see traps before you fall into them. And then comes the turn. Verse 5, let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. The compiler isn't saying this book is just for beginners. He's saying even if you're already wise, this book will make you wiser. Even if you're already sharp, you'll learn new skills here. That's a bold claim. It's like saying this book has no expiration date. It works for everyone. Verse 6, for understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings of the wise and their riddles. He's telling you that proverbs are enigmas. They aren't direct answers. They're questions in disguise. And if you learn to read them correctly, you'll see patterns that other people walk right past. But then verse 7 arrives, and the tone changes completely. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Notice the structure, 2 halves. The first is a positive statement. The fear of God is the foundation. The second is the negative warning. Fools reject that foundation. And here's where the text begins to reveal something that runs through the entire rest of the book. The rejection of wisdom isn't an intellectual error. It's a moral decision. It's an act of rebellion. In Proverbs, this word for fool appears again and again, and always with the same characteristic. The fool isn't someone who doesn't know. The fool is someone who refuses to know. Someone who looks at the evidence and says, I don't care. Think about that for a second. The distinction isn't between smart and dumb. It's between open and closed. Why does any of this matter beyond Proverbs? Because chapter 1 establishes an intellectual architecture that shows up everywhere. In Genesis, the tree of knowledge isn't a tree of ignorance. It's a tree of wisdom. And the temptation of Adam and Eve isn't ignorance. It's wisdom without reverence. The ability to choose without submitting to God. In the Psalms, over and over, the psalmist says, teach me your ways. Not give me intelligence. Teach me. There's a posture of openness there, of humility, of being willing to be shaped. In Job, the entire book is an exploration of what happens when genuine wisdom, the kind rooted in reverence, reaches a wall it can't think its way past. Job doesn't lack yirah. Job 1:1 says it plainly. He feared God and turned away from evil. But his intelligence can't explain what's happening to him, and the book forces a question that Proverbs 1 sets up. Is there a wisdom beyond the one you can reason your way to? In Deuteronomy, Moses lays the choice bare. I set before you today life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. That's the same architecture. You have the capacity to choose, but only one choice is wise, and it requires submitting to God. And when you get to the New Testament, Jesus often teaches in parables, comparisons and stories that require openness rather than mere intelligence. And in Matthew 11:25, he praises the Father for hiding who knows how to do something well. But chokmah by itself isn't moral. An Egyptian magician can have chokmah. A con artist can have chokmah. Someone who is an expert in deception can have chokmah. What transforms chokmah from a mere skill into a moral virtue is that it's rooted in yirah, in that reverential awe of God. When we read Proverbs, we see practical advice about money, relationships, and work. And those tips are useful, but they aren't the point. The point is that those tips only work if you're applying them from a posture of humility before God. That's why verse 7 isn't an afterthought. It's the key that unlocks everything else. When was Proverbs compiled? Scholars debate this. Some place it in Solomon's time, the 10th century BC. Others say much later, during the Second Temple period, maybe the 4th or 3rd century BC. But here's what we know regardless of the date. Whoever brought these materials together was participating in a much larger ancient conversation about what it meant to live wisely. Across the ancient Near East, during the first millennium BC, there was what scholars call the wisdom movement. Thinkers in Babylon, in Egypt, in Syria were producing texts about how to live well, how to understand the world, how to make good decisions. And some of those texts were secular. They didn't invoke the gods at all. They just talked about how the world works. The compiler of Proverbs was in conversation with that tradition, but he was saying something fundamentally different. He was saying, yes, there's a practical wisdom. Yes, there are patterns in how the world operates. But that wisdom only holds together if it's rooted in a relationship with God. One distinction worth sitting with: the difference between yirah and ordinary fear. Hebrew can also use words like pachad for dread or terror, the kind of fear you feel when you see a lion. That's a survival response. Yirah often carries a broader sense. It's what you feel when you're standing in the presence of something greater than you, more powerful than you, wiser than you, and you recognize it. When Abraham stands before God in Genesis 22, the text says he had yirah. He wasn't running, he wasn't screaming, he was standing in total reverence. When the psalmist says in Psalm 111, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, he's saying the same thing Proverbs 1 says. True wisdom begins when you recognize there is something bigger than you, and that runs against everything the modern world teaches. Every self-help book on the shelf says trust yourself, believe in your own reasoning, but Proverbs 1 says something else. Be confident, yes, but let that confidence be rooted in a relationship with God, not in yourself. Go back to the fool. The fool isn't someone who lacks access to wisdom. That's what makes it so uncomfortable. The fool has access. He just rejects it. He sees it and says, I don't care. And in Proverbs, that rejection plays out in completely predictable ways. The fool speaks without thinking and causes conflict. The fool rejects the counsel of his parents and suffers for it. The fool is lazy and ends up in poverty. The fool is arrogant and falls into ruin. But here's the part that stops most people cold. Proverbs often present these outcomes not merely as external punishment, but as consequences woven into the moral structure of reality. It's saying, look, this is how the world works. If you act this way, this is what follows, because that's how reality is built. And that's what sets Proverbs apart from other books in the Old Testament. Proverbs isn't primarily talking about God's law. It's talking about God's wisdom. And God's wisdom is written into the structure of reality itself. If you understand this, If you understand that Proverbs 1 is a prologue, establishing an intellectual architecture, then everything that comes after makes sense. Chapters 2 through 9 are extended speeches. A father talking to a son, saying, "Here are the traps. Here are the people who want to deceive you. Here are the roads that look good but lead to ruin. Learn to see them. And the reason you can learn to see them is that you have access to God's wisdom. You have access to a way of seeing the world that is clearer than the way fools see it." Then chapters 10 through 29 are hundreds of short proverbs, one line, one comparison, one pattern. Each one saying the same thing. Look at how the world works. And chapters 30 and 31, the sayings of Agur and Lemuel, different voices, different angles, but all pointing at the same reality. There's a pattern, there's a wisdom, and if you learn to see it, you can live well. But none of that means anything without the prologue, without understanding that wisdom doesn't begin with you. It begins with God. The word musar, discipline. Musar isn't merely punishment, it's formation. It's what happens when someone wiser than you corrects you, and you're willing to listen. The opposite of arrogance. The opposite of a closed mind. It means think, but think from a posture of humility. The Hebrew word for despise in verse 7 is baz. It means to consider something without value, to look at it and dismiss it. And here's what matters. It isn't accidental. It isn't ignorance. It's a choice. Someone who sees wisdom and says, "That's not worth my time." That's a moral act. The fool isn't someone who can't know. The fool is someone who chooses not to. Someone who chooses not to grow, not to change. And in Proverbs, that choice has consequences that are entirely predictable. One of the most striking things Proverbs 1 does is redefine what it means to be intelligent. In the modern world, intelligence means cognitive capacity, the ability to solve problems, see patterns, and reason clearly. But in Proverbs, intelligence means something else. It means the ability to see reality as it actually is, to understand how the world really works, to make choices that lead toward life, not away from it. And that ability isn't primarily a matter of intellect. It's a matter of character. It's a matter of being willing to be taught. Verse 5 says, "Let the wise listen, not read. Listen." Listening requires openness. It requires the willingness to be corrected. A wise person, according to Proverbs, is someone who doesn't trust only their own judgment. A foolish person is someone who does, and that's a complete redefinition of intelligence. There's one more thing the compiler connects that's easy to glide past. Verse 3 doesn't just mention wisdom, it mentions justice, righteousness, and equity. Why? Because according to Proverbs, you can't be truly wise without being just. Wisdom that isn't in service of justice isn't wisdom. It's cunning. A criminal can be cunning. A con artist can be clever. But they aren't wise because their intelligence isn't oriented toward what's right. True chokmah, the kind rooted in the fear of God, always bends toward justice, always bends toward what is right. That's one of the features that gives Proverbs its distinctive moral and theological force. Other texts say, "Here's how to succeed." Proverbs says, "Here's how to succeed in a way that is just." So here's what Proverbs 1 is really doing when you see it whole. It's not giving you a list of good advice. It's giving you the operating system that makes the advice work. The compiler is saying this book is not a collection of tips. It's an exploration of how God built the world, an invitation to see reality the way God sees it. And that's what makes it distinctive within the wisdom traditions of the ancient Near East. When a king compiled a book of wisdom, it was usually to say, "I'm wise, do what I say." But Solomon, or whoever wrote in his name, did something else entirely. He compiled observations about how the world works, and then said, "But here's the foundation underneath all of it, the fear of God. I'm not asking you to trust me, I'm asking you to trust God, and here's how you can learn to do that." If you understand Proverbs 1, you understand how the entire Bible works. Because across the whole Bible, there's a tension between two things, human knowledge and the wisdom of God. And the Bible keeps saying the same thing. Human knowledge is useful, but it isn't enough. You have to submit it to the wisdom of God. In Genesis, Adam and Eve have the knowledge of good and evil, but they don't have the wisdom to use it, and that's what ruins them. In the Psalms, the psalmist keeps saying, "I don't trust in my own strength, I trust in God." The prophets say, "The people trust in their own intelligence, but that won't save them. And in the New Testament, Jesus keeps telling his disciples, "You don't understand. You don't see. You need to learn to see the way I see." All of that, every bit of it, is already contained in Proverbs 1, already packed into 7 verses. So here's what I'd ask you to do this week. Read Proverbs 1, the whole chapter, not just the first 7 verses. Read it slowly. Read it twice if you can. And while you're reading, ask yourself one question. Where am I being the fool? Not where am I uninformed? Where am I choosing not to know? Where am I trusting my own intelligence instead of submitting it to God's wisdom? Don't answer that quickly. That's not a question you answer. That's a question you live with. Because Proverbs 1 isn't a text you just read. It's a text that invites you to change, to adopt a new way of seeing, to submit your intelligence to something bigger than yourself. And if you actually do that, if you really do, then everything else in your life starts to make a different kind of sense. In one word, what do you think separates knowledge from wisdom? Drop it in the comments. If someone in your life has been carrying that question, the one about whether knowing more is the same as being wise, send them this video. It might be the thing that reframes it for them. The scribe in Jerusalem didn't start with a command. He started with a mirror. And nearly 3,000 years later, the mirror still works.